My next guest on the program is James Campbell, National Political Editor for the Herald Sun, joining us from our Melbourne studio. James, thanks very much for your time. Let's talk Turkey, namely what Scott Morrison had to say about this situation. I found this curious. He doesn't want to criticise Donald Trump at all, even though, yes, we know Turkey's actually going about the invasion, but Donald Trump clearly has allowed this to happen, hasn't he?
Well, that was the takeaway from the statement his press secretary put out on Sunday when he had a chat on the phone to President Erdogan, and he said, oh, well, this is happening, we won't be there. They didn't say he was holding it back. In June, in a press conference in Japan, unprompted, he brought the idea of a Turkish incursion into northern Syria up and said that, he had a big argument and he was going to massacre the Kurds, and I said no. And this time, he didn't say no. In the press statement on Sunday, he didn't even mention the Kurds. Similarly, Morrison today didn't mention the United States. Everybody's sort of not mentioning one thing in this, in what is a situation that essentially everything connects. It's depressing.
Because Scott Morrison here is saying, well, look, we saw this was coming, and maybe some people did, but does it strike you as strange the extent to which Scott Morrison doesn't want to criticise Donald Trump's actions here, considering how outspoken Republicans are?
No, it doesn't surprise me, because we don't get to choose who the President of the United States is. The Australian government has to maintain good relationship with them. And this is a president who has a little list of people he doesn't like, and he's got a small list of people he does, and we're on the good list. So it's of no advantage to us to be moved from one column to the other. What Morrison really thinks in private and what he'll say in public, or what he'll say to Trump's face, are very different things. But that's statecraft for you, isn't it? You don't get paid to tell the truth to people. You get paid to tell them what you think is in your interests to tell them. And he's just doing his job in this regard. What people in Canberra will tell you about Trump in private and what they'll say in public, as I'm sure you're aware, is a very different thing. And that runs across all political parties. There are some Trump fans, particularly in the coalition, but there are also a lot of people in the government who roll their eyes. But, the reality is this is what we have. We have to live with it.
And I get what you're saying. I guess it strikes me that you can still say something along the lines of, look, it's a bit disappointing. We get why Donald Trump wanted to do it. They've been in Syria for a long time. But look, I take what you're saying. What about the Australians in camps over there? The line is pretty simply that if it's going to risk any life, no one will be rescued. It's got the very complicating factor of the women being connected to ISIS. Now, some are saying they were tricked or held captive, but it seems as though the government's not going to do much, or at least say, well, the risk is too great.
Well, why would we? They've put themselves in that situation. It's not for the Australian government to be sending special forces in to pluck them out of camps. I'm sorry, they've made their bed, they've got to lie on it.
As I said, some saying at least that they were tricked in some way, but certainly at least some,
very sad, but
you say.
You would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. You would. Absolutely you would. It doesn't mean it's not true for some, but yeah.
But even if it is true, even if it's true, so what?
If someone's been, borderline kidnapped from the border, then I think you should go, well, can we do anything to help them out?
But what were they doing there in the first place? I mean, they weren't kidnapped from Western Sydney.
Well, the one particular story claiming that they were told that they were going there to help provide aid, and then they ended up in the caliphate.
Tough place. Not our problem.
Let's talk about the ALP's policy on carbon emissions this week. Joel Fitzgibbon weighing in. Not universal condemnation, but not much support. The leader feeling the need to weigh in on Twitter, Anthony Albanese and Mark Butler, a short time ago, pushing back at this. What have your thoughts been on the way this has played out this week?
Well, Labor's policy in this space is clearly a work in progress. It's not something that probably the rest of us need to get too steamed up about. the chances of them being able to implement this anytime soon are looking increasingly remote. Fitzgibbon has a political position that's essentially not 100 miles away from the seat which he represents, which incidentally are the sort of seats that the Labor Party needs to win more of if it's going to form government. Butler and Albanese have a different audience. I mean, I wouldn't be taking much notice of it in one sense, because what they're arguing about now and where they land at the next election, likely to be very, very different.
So this is the key question as well. They're having this policy review, but the indication is they're not going to settle on a target anytime soon. It seems on one level maybe leaves them vulnerable. Well, what's your target now? But they can just wait, can't they? Do you think it's tenable to wait for a couple of years and then come up with a new target?
Well, absolutely. But I mean, in this space, what's the government's energy policy? I mean, they're the government. Having binned the neg, what is their policy? Like they're it's one thing for an opposition not to have a policy.
That's the point. Put it back on them. Yeah. And energy companies unhappy. They're unhappy with the big stick. For now, emissions keep going up as well. So focus on them, you say? Well,
yeah, I would be focusing on the government here, and not at this point talking about their 45 or 40, whatever they want to go with. I mean, the sooner they bin that and just start talking about the deficiencies of where the government is, I would have thought the better off they'll be.
Sounds like that's where they're heading as well.
But the whole thing's a mess. I mean, they're still... Labor is still processing what happened to them in May. There is no consensus amongst them about what went wrong or how they fix it and how they avoid it, is there?
No, there's not. I think there's consensus around a couple of things, and probably franking credits is about the one thing they all agree on. But yeah, I think you make a good point, and for that reason, binning it, shelving it, call it what you will, we might not have a target for some time, but maybe that's not a bad thing. James Campbell, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Great. See you, Tom.